All right. So I am the plant pathologist on this project. So my focus was diseases. And I'll remind everyone that the reason we did this project is because we realized that a lot of high tunnel growers will plant tomatoes year after year and not really rotating. And if you don't rotate, you're building up the pests and pathogens year to year, right? And so, and also certain amendments like salts. And but anyway, so I'm looking at it from the plant disease standpoint. And my concern are particularly soil-borne pathogens. Those are pathogens or mostly fungi that live in the soil and will affect roots and stems and vascular tissue. So that's what we were looking at. And if growers don't rotate and we have this buildup, we questioned, will cut flowers break that cycle? How can cut flowers be used not just as a financial plus for our growers, but also to break the cycle of any disease buildup? And so that's where I am coming in from this. We know that tomatoes have diseases. We know tomato diseases. It's not a new thing in high tunnels, but some of them are very host specific. They're tomato specific. Some of them are generalists, so they can attack anything. So our question was, can we break the cycle on some of our specific diseases? And even those more common ones, will they carry over? And is there some way that there's a preference that these particularly fungi, some bacteria will have? So that's where I came into this, is for that goal of breaking the cycle and what will rotation show us. So let's get started. Let's take a look. I am gonna first tell you the answer to my question is that we did not see disease carryover. This year we had 3 tunnels, but 1 season. So this is not something we've been doing a long time. So if we would have cut flowers every fall, we may see something very different. So I have no real conclusions to tell you. I can't tell you that cut flowers break the cycle. But I will tell you that with one exception, we did not see disease carrying over from one crop to the next. So we didn't see a jump of diseases on tomato and then relating directly to cut flowers, which is really good news for cut flower growers because we really just had one disease problem in the cut flower, so very low input. And that's what we wanted. We were looking for something that was really low input that would give our growers an economic boost when a tunnel would be ordinarily fallow. So I'll talk about that one exception in a second. I'm not gonna hold your suspense here, but I will say that there are several diseases that can affect both crops, but we really didn't see that carryover. So I'll go through some details as we go. That disease that we saw on cut flowers, the one disease we saw on cut flowers was powdery mildew. Cosmos and zinnia, this is zinnia. We did see powdery mildew on zinnias and again, cosmos. It was on the leaves. It did not affect the blossoms. And as Alexis tells us, as we understand, that is not a problem from the marketing standpoint because those leaves are going to be stripped off. Now, as a pathologist, I will tell you that that powdery mildew can move on to blossoms, and I would manage it. I would have managed it earlier than we did. So you'll see in a minute, Jonathan Shepard is going to talk economics. But I would definitely try to manage, at least suppress and reduce the amount of powdery mildew. There are 3 powdery mildews that we quote unquote identified in these tunnels. They are all very closely related, and it's highly likely that we just had one. So from these are some pathogens, the Golovinomyces, probably the Spadaceus. They affect Asteraceae host, a lot of our different weed hosts. So this is a naturally occurring, this is a ubiquitous powdery mildew that's outside. And of course, our tunnel sides are rolled up during the summer and early fall. So this powdery mildew is just moving in and out. This is not the same powdery mildew that you would see on tomato. So this is not a crossover disease, but it's one I think that everyone is going to experience, everyone is going to struggle with. And I am going to be recommending a preventative fungicide for powdery mildew. We're working on this project again in 2021, so I'm going to focus on that a little bit more than I did last year. All right, so here's the cosmos. So we had powdery mildew on cosmos, particularly in the Breathitt County in the eastern Kentucky. It didn't look quite the same because, of course, cosmos has a different leaf structure. So we did see some necrosis. That's the browning that you see in the upper left. So it was kind of, we would see the browning and kind of the gray color from the leaf damage. Whereas the zinnia, you mostly just saw the white, fluffy, fungal body, the mycelia that we're really most familiar with when we think about powdery mildew. So that's our big disease in cut flowers. That is really the only thing I'm coming out of this saying we need to treat for, we need to manage, and I would manage it from a preventative standpoint, at least be able to suppress it. We had our one exception. I'd tell you about it. In Breathitt County, there was southern blight on sunflower. That's Athelia rolfsii. Most people know it as Sclerotium rolfsii. It's changed names, but it's the same thing. So southern blight is intense at that research station. I had some other trials. I had some hemp trials there. They all had southern blight. So there is just a high population of southern blight there. But considering the amount of southern blight that I saw in my hemp, we did not have that much in our tomatoes and cut flowers. So the cut flowers were more tolerant than I expected them to be. I think, you know, for the amount, we lost maybe 10% of our tomatoes, maybe, Sean, to southern blight. We did not lose but a couple of sunflowers to southern blight. And we know it was in that soil. So not highly susceptible, but susceptible all the same. All right, so since I don't have any good disease stories to tell you about cut flowers, let's go into a little bit about some tomato diseases. The tomato diseases we typically see in high tunnels. I'll go through these quickly. There are a lot of them. I'll go through those, and I want to touch on whether we see a potential for them affecting cut flowers as we use this rotation. And again, keep in mind that we're using cut flowers not just from a profitability aspect, but we're also thinking about breaking the disease cycle for some of these pathogens. All right, so I'm going in alphabetical order, by the way. So they're not in order of importance. The first one is bacterial canker. This clavibacter, tomato and potato, very specific. So we're not going to see this one jumping to cut flowers. This is a non-issue for us. Bacterial speck, that's a Pseudomonas syringae pathovar tomato. So when you see a pathovar, that you have a specificity there. And tomato relatives, so the solanaceous crops, again, that's not going to affect us when it comes to our cut flowers. And particularly notice the cut flowers that we chose were not related to tomatoes. Very important as we are talking about a rotation. Bacterial spot, that's a Xanthomonas. So tomato and pepper specificity, you'll see populations changing a little bit as you go from, well, we're kind of Midwest and we're sort of Southeast. So Kentucky is a bit of a transitional zone. So we see some fluctuations in which of the Xanthomonas species. But tomato and pepper or where they stay, they're not moving into our cut flower species. Early blight. So early blight in tomato is caused by some different Alternaria species than Alternaria that we might see in cut flower. So these are different. Tomato, eggplant, solanaceous weeds. So again, our early blight alternaria, our pathogen, is not going to affect our cut flowers. Gray mold, botrytis, or botrytis blight, or botrytis. I'm trying to think of some like I think leaf blight or petal blight is what we often hear it called. Gray mold because it's fuzzy and gray, but Botrytis cinerea, it's really ubiquitous. It has over 200 host species. It loves dying, dead, or damaged tissue. So as you have petals that are dying, or if you have insect damage, you'll see botrytis kick in. But botrytis is everywhere. So I'm not going to say it's jumping from your tomato to your cut flowers. It's outside, right? It's affecting all kinds of plants out there. So it's just moving around in very large numbers. So if you have a high humidity in your tunnel, if you're overhead irrigating in your tunnel, or if you have a lot of damaged tissue, botrytis may very well colonize. I am not looking at this one as one that's connected to a tomato crop. All right, so leaf mold or fulva leaf mold, this pathogen, very tomato specific. By the way, Passiflora is its new name. You may have heard it called fulva or cladosporium, but leaf mold, tomato specific again. So this is all really good news, right? Here's powdery mildew. Remember, I talked about powdery mildew on cut flowers, and I told you that it was caused by a series of Golovinomyces species. Powdery mildew on tomatoes, primarily oidium, and it is tomato specific. In the West Coast, you have a different group of pathogens. We have not seen it here, but oidium is our eastern U.S. powdery mildew. Again, tomato specific. This is not the one we saw in cut flowers. So we use the term powdery mildew to describe a disease. A disease is a symptom, or a disease is what we see, but the actual causal pathogen, very different, vastly different. So no chance there of a cross infection. All right, Septoria leaf spot. There are lots of Septorias. Septorias are mostly host specific, and even they have preferences within a species. They have preferences for their host. So Septoria leaf spot, not one that's going to move into our cut flowers. And I don't know of any Septoria species that affect the cut flowers that we planted. All right, there is our southern blight. Athelia rolfsii, previously known as Sclerotium rolfsii. This is a big one, over 500 host species. So if you have southern blight, it could definitely move in or stick around in your high tunnel. So the key is to not let these types of invasives come in, or it's not an invasive, actually. It's pretty ubiquitous. It can be anywhere and everywhere, but once it establishes, it's very difficult to get rid of. And that's kind of the lesson altogether here, is that pathogens, especially soil-borne pathogens, build up. They build up over time. And if we rotate, we're breaking those cycles when those numbers are very low. Once numbers get really high, it takes a lot of work and a lot of years to break those cycles. In the Breathitt County tunnel, we definitely had southern blight. We know it's all over that research station. So, I would not expect to see that in a grower's tunnel, but if you know you have southern blight, we should be managing it anyway. So it would be no surprise that it would continue from year to year. All right, this is a really common one in tomato, timber rot or white mold. This is Sclerotinia. This is a stalk rot. We saw Sclerotinia or white mold in all three locations, primarily in Lexington and in the Boyle County area. It's pretty common. It especially, this pathogen particularly likes cool temperatures, cool soils. So that's why we saw it in our tomatoes, because remember, we're planting our tomatoes early in the season. Sclerotinia does not like warm temperatures. It doesn't like warm soils. So while it was in the soil and it could have infected or affected our cut flowers, it was warm. It was summer by the time we put those cut flowers in. So the susceptibility wasn't there. The environmental conditions weren't right for the pathogen to infect our cut flowers. So we're going to call this one a no. There may be a chance that we see some infection, because this is a very broad pathogen. It infects a lot of different host species, but it's the temperature that we're discussing here. So Sclerotinia, not likely to be a problem with cut flowers, but if you have it in tomato, it will come back year after year. And I don't know if we're going to break the disease cycle. I don't think that cut flowers are going to be a solution for white mold management, but definitely it's not going to contribute to the buildup of that pathogen in soils. All right, tomato spotted wilt virus. Tomato spotted wilt is transmitted by thrips. So Katie was talking about thrips. This disease, this virus, has over 1,000 host species. So if you have tomato spotted wilt in your greenhouse or in your high tunnel, it can absolutely be transmitted from one crop to the next if those thrips are present. So that fallow period between tomato harvest and cut flower planting is very important, but it's primarily important if you have tomato spotted wilt in your tomatoes. If you don't have the virus in your tomatoes, then there's nothing to be transmitted from one crop to the next. But tomato spotted wilt can absolutely affect your cut flowers. Most of the species that we would plant would be susceptible to tomato spotted wilt. But if you have the virus in your high tunnels, we have a lot more management considerations to discuss. All right, Verticillium Wilt. We don't see a lot of Verticillium Wilt in Kentucky, but two different species of Verticillium can affect tomatoes and most of your herbaceous crops, including flowers, weeds. They're all susceptible to Verticillium. So this would be one. Again, if you have this pathogen that has built up in the soils, if you have this disease, you'll have it every year in your tomatoes, and it will affect your cut flowers. But again, this is a big disease. This is a very costly disease. You would know if you have it. And I would not recommend moving to cut flowers if you have Verticillium in your tunnel. All right, Fusarium wilt. This is a vascular disease. So the Fusarium oxysporum has some specificity. It moves into the vascular tissue of your plants. The Fusarium oxysporum that affects tomato is only going to affect the solanaceous crops like tomato, eggplant, and pepper. It is not going to move into your cut flowers. So this is definitely one that, again, very tomato specific. Another Fusarium. This is a different Fusarium. I'm sorry, Fusarium Crown Rot. So this is a different form of specialis, and it is it's in the literature. It is very specific to tomato, eggplant, and pepper again. But studies have shown that it can also move to spinach, beets, legumes, cucurbits, several weed species. So this is one that might be of concern for us. So if you have Fusarium Crown Rot in your tomatoes, it's a conversation I'd like to have with you. I would like to do some testing before you put anything down, right? Even before you rotate back into tomatoes. This would be a cycle we would definitely want to try to break. But there's a possibility that, that this Fusarium can move into your cut flowers. All right, so I'm getting to the end. Pythium root rot. There are several Pythium species that can affect tomatoes. They can affect cut flowers. They don't have a preference. Um, some of them are more warm season, have warm season preferences. Some have cool season preferences. But overall, there are a lot of Pythium species out there. They love young, succulent roots. They love herbaceous roots, herbaceous plants, and both tomato and our cut flowers are herbaceous. So Pythiums are always a danger. Some of them are really ubiquitous. They're in our soils. Others come in with our transplants, so always be careful on your transplants, not just for Pythium. So once Pythium is there, it needs water to complete its life cycle. So this is a pathogen that likes a lot of water. We call them water molds. So it's not a true fungus. We put them in a category called oomycetes or water molds. And so this is one you would see earlier in the spring, unless you have, for instance, your greenhouse plants come in contaminated. So Pythiums are always a risk, no matter what you plant, and cut flowers are no more or less susceptible than anything else that we have. Okay, Rhizoctonia, it can cause a root rot or a damping off. This is Rhizoctonia solani. It's one that has over 200 host species. This is supposed to say host species, so it can affect 200 different host plants, including tomato and the cut flowers that we would choose. So it likes an herbaceous plant. We see it a lot in chrysanthemum production. So it's everywhere, and it's another one. Once it establishes in your soil, it's hard to break that cycle. But if you don't have it, it's not likely to come in real easily. Okay, and finally, root knot nematode. The Meloidogynes are they're pretty tough. They like herbaceous plants, tomatoes, a lot of our cut flowers. If you have root knot nematodes in your high tunnel, we should be working with you anyway. Cut flowers are not going to break the cycle, but they will in fact be susceptible. So they are not something. If you have root knot, then I would not put any susceptible plant in there. All right, so finally, the question is, what pathogens carry over to cut flowers? There's likely none that specifically carry over. You can introduce pathogens in, but those that are utilizing cut flowers to continue a cycle, I don't think that's happening. But if you have certain diseases, especially soil-borne pathogens that have built up in your tunnel, then they can definitely, some of them, a handful of them, can definitely affect cut flowers. But so cut flowers are not contributing to anything, any problems, or any risk for any tomato grower. That because buildup of some of these soil-borne pathogens is a problem in a lot of tomato production. Cut flowers would not be the culprit at all. In fact, cut flowers can quite possibly break some of these cycles. We're still working on that. But there is really nothing that is telling me from a plant pathology standpoint that you should not be planting cut flowers. In fact, all positives point to cut flower production.